you explained that a lack of human connection has been linked to many mental and physical health issues, including hoarding, rage, addiction, depression, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and suicide.
There are so many other bits of research. For example, Dr. Louise Hawkley studied micro-awakenings in people's sleep as a marker of loneliness. So people who have disrupted sleep, loneliness is like, the disrupted sleep is a symptom of loneliness. And obviously if you're not sleeping, that's going to lead to a lot of other issues. Your serotonin's going to be low, so you're going to have a diminished mood, which can then snowball into other things. The power of desensitization, the power of, if you're lonely, get out and put yourself out there and you will get better. Yes, the first few interactions will be awkward. Yes, the first interactions might drain you, but you will get better.
Hi, EnvisionAirs. It's Nicole and Yuen here. Welcome to the EnvisionAir podcast. This is the podcast where we envision living our best lives by exploring everyday topics related to health, wealth, and community. On today's episode, we have the lovely Simone Heng, who is a human connection specialist and author of an amazing book that I read a few months ago called Let's Talk About Loneliness. Simone has a wealth of experience working in global media. She's had a very impressive global career working as an international broadcaster for Virgin Radio Dubai, HBO Asia, CNBC, and other global media outlets. As well, she's a very highly sought after speaker for many Fortune 500 companies, including Meta, Google, Salesforce, and Adobe. As well, she's recently spoken at various different stages, including TEDx, the United Nations, and even most recently Harvard, all on the topic of human connection. Today, Simone will be speaking with us about the loneliness epidemic we're all facing and why human connection is so important for us to be able to live our best lives. We will also be diving into parts of her book, which I know will be super insightful to those listening because I found it super insightful when I read her book several months ago. Not only did I learn about the impact that loneliness can have on our mental health, but it can also have significant impact on our physical health as well. So a very, very warm welcome to Simone. Thank you so much for joining us all the way from Singapore. Thank you.
Thank you for reading the book and finding me. I think you're one of my first new friends made from reading the book on the other side of the world. So it's really proof that, publishing doesn't make much money, but it definitely introduces new people to your ecosystem. I'm right in saying that, right? It wasn't off social media or LinkedIn. You found me because of the book.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and I was like, oh my God, it changed my life. Pardon me.
You walked into the bookstore and you saw it? What was the bookstore?
No, it was online. It was online. It was on Instagram or something. You came up, there was like a feed and it was a social media. It was social media. And I was like, who is Simone Heng? I think it's because I tend to read a lot of self-development books and I'm a big fan of your publisher, Hay House. I really, really read a lot of their books, including Vex King's book. That was probably one of the first books several years ago that I read that really had a significant impact on my life from a kind of spiritual, energetic level. So Instagram. Thank you, Instagram.
Yeah, even if you follow Hay House, they were posting on it a lot. So it could be Hay House. That's wonderful to know that all of the effort of social media actually works.
100%. Yay! I know. And I'm so glad that we've met. And not only did I read your book and I thought you were amazing, but then equally we met at the Hay House event a couple weeks ago. So it's just amazing how the universe works so beautifully. Yeah. So, okay, Simone, this is normally the time in the podcast where I invite guests to talk about their origin story. However, before we do that, I wanted to actually share with you a listener question that we received from an EnvisionAir called Teresa. She wanted to know whether you have experienced periods of human disconnect and trauma and how you were able to overcome this. So because I'm familiar with your book, I know you talk so vulnerably and so openly, really like so openly and raw about some of these experiences. So I was hoping that maybe you could take in consideration this question when sharing about your origin story and hopefully answer Teresa's question as well.
Sure. So you'd like me to share the origin story and kind of imbue a lot of Teresa's question in it as well. So
if that's okay, yeah. Yes,
please. Of course. So I was raised in Perth in Western Australia, but born in Singapore to mixed parents. And so I experienced disconnect culturally between, you know, the two different sides of my family that were different races. I also felt very much that I didn't belong in what was largely at the time a very white environment. In fact, we can only recently describe it that way. It's so wonderful that people of color are now allowed to describe. If I described it this way 10 years ago, I probably would have got vitriolic response online. But I now feel safe enough to say, you know, Western Australia, Perth at that time in the 1990s was a very white place. And so I didn't feel that I belonged in my community. And then because of the trauma that happened within the home, like my father passing away in front of me, and also my mum having quite an avoidant style of parenting. So this very traditionally Asian parenting where love is paid upon obedience. So love is very conditionally given. And it was very starkly juxtaposed with the parenting that I saw around me in this very Western environment where people were openly loving and demonstrative. My parents are very conservative. My mother was really, really strict. And so I wasn't allowed to also do much as an adolescent. And so that was also really, really lonely. I was always good at making friends and connecting. And I think that's because I found my family home growing up so unpleasant. So I became very good at fostering and building family outside the family home. And then the irony of that was because of how strict they were culturally, I was then not allowed to engage with my friends beyond school. So I ended up being that kid that loved school because school was an escape from the home. So I did like every extracurricular activity you can imagine. To this day on Instagram, people are like, you can paint, wait, you can sing. And it's all the gift of my trauma that I was like, yes, I'll join choir. Yes, I'll do art. Yes, I'll do all these things that will keep me in school, except for physical education. That was the only thing. Anything that could keep me out of the home longer. And it was just this really big secret because in the Asian community, you never talk badly about your family. You pretend that your parents are perfect. And nothing I write in the book, nothing augments shame like silence. So the isolation of feeling this way and the contrast of my sister who is very avoidant like my mother in her behavior. So I don't think it impacted her, but me being very emotionally sensitive, very empathic, and very much having an anxious style of attaching to people, you know, it was crippling. Not getting that love in the way that I needed it was crippling and very traumatic. And I write about it in parts of the book. And one of the wonderful things about writing a book is like you really heal. The journey didn't kind of stop there. You know, I went off to work in Singapore and then live in Switzerland and then the United Arab Emirates. The same psychology as the trying to stay in school. The more ocean I could put between me and my family, I felt the better. And then when my mother got sick, you know, this is the thing about growing up Asian. It doesn't matter if you've had a hard time with your parents. You are conditioned. Firstly, you love them deeply. That's a given. I should probably mention that. But you are conditioned with a deep sense of filial obligation. And I did not even question in my mind that it was right or wrong to give up my dream career in Dubai. It was not even a question in my mind. This is how great the conditioning was. That I would give everything up to nurse my ailing mother. You know, and Asian female children, we go through this. It's never put on the boys, it's put on us. I was so ignorant in making that decision. And I went back to the family home and we had to get mum into a facility because she became paralyzed. And on top of that, my mother had gotten hoarding disorder during the 10 years since my father's death as like a way of coping. Yeah. And so I was then tasked with cleaning up this hoard for 6 months on my own in the family home. And that's really probably the loneliest, even more lonely than when my father died. Yes. But all through my life, if we look at a lot of these major like tentpole moments that I've shared, there are stark feelings of lacking in belonging. And people don't think it looking at me.
No.
Because I'm super strong and I think I'm strong because of necessity. Whereas I would really like to meet a beautiful man and be loved in the way I always wanted to be loved and lean back and not have to be strong and hypervigilant. But it's so wired into me at this stage, right? And I think people think, you know, I'm quite glamorous and I don't get lonely. But if we look at Hollywood, at some of the people like Marilyn Monroe who had deep childhood wounds, you then get in a cycle of seeking validation. You then misread fame as a way to satiate a lack of true love and acceptance. And you're lonelier than ever. I have to say, being a public person, before I started being vulnerable in the way that I am, was so lonely. It's only when I got the bravery to write the book and speak truthfully online did I get not the love and connection, but did I get people like you, Nicole, who weren't just followers, you became my friends. Like we could talk, you know, whatever you give is what you get. So if you're giving cute photos of you in a bodysuit, you're going to get only like cute comments back that have no substance. So that's the evolution story in a nutshell. But
That's
I mean,
amazing.
yeah, immigrant shopkeeper's daughter, and no one would think it by how I've had to maladapt to survive
100%.
in the world on my own.
So how did you, all of those are, I mean, those are really serious big traumas in your life. And I know that you did touch on, again, the sort of the impact of having a traditional, very like Asian upbringing, which I understand because my dad, well, he was Chinese, and before, like, he passed a few years ago. And so I never know, do I say was or is? Anyway, whatever. He
Yeah.
was Chinese. I think growing up, like, he was given a certain sort of love, and that's how he showed it. So with us, it was like, do your homework, do your math homework. If you do the extracurricular math, like, that's really good. And then also it was more about, like, he showed his love by like providing, be a provider rather than a
food.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, I give you food. I tutor at the Kumon. I used to do Kumon. I tutor at the
Me
Kumon
too.
Center. Yeah. And so, like, I would get to go for free to the Kumon Center. Like, my dad was like a barterer. Like, but he was such a good connect. He'd be like, okay, what do you need? Okay, you need food. I'll do it. Anyway. Yeah, he's such a hustler. Anyway, I do know that that's sort of like, that is a sad, because that's sort of parenting style, which is slightly avoidance, but still nurturing in a different way. It can impact how you see the world, and it can be a form of trauma that we don't really address. And so how did you overcome some of the challenges that you faced?
Well, I always think connection is the antidote to loneliness. So I think one of the things that I did really well, if I look at all the 4 countries I've lived in before I turned 30, was I created family through friends, really good, deep friendships. And if I look at, like, I have a group of girls from Dubai that are like a replica of my girls in Switzerland, that are like a replica of my girls in Singapore. It's quite weird and quite scary, actually. So I think I became very good at choosing friends. I learned the hypervigilance from that childhood, also became quite good in eliminating people that were bad for me. And therefore my growth has been exponential, because I'm not afraid to, I think being a serial expat also, you don't get scared of like cutting people that are lowering your vibration.
Do you think that that's really interesting?
Yeah.
I've only recently discovered this in the last year, and I'm like, whoa, my life is so different for the better because of it. It's so weird. But yeah, please go ahead. That's so interesting.
Absolutely. So I think when you're an expat, people fall by the wayside by attrition based on how much they're willing to maintain that connection. So once you lose them by attrition, you realize how simple it could be to lose those people that aren't good for you.
Yeah.
Whereas maybe people who live in the same place all the time have more fear associated with culling. I cherish the good friends, and I have no issue as I get older culling.
I agree.
Those that aren't happy for me. And I'm a pretty shiny person, and I think that can be quite hard to be around for some people. And if it's hard for other people to be around for their own jealousy or envy issues or whatever, I have to cut that. They secretly don't want what's best for me.
100%.
Human connector. It just means that my therapist says, like, your number one priority is keeping little Simone safe. So what is the thing that's going to keep little Simone safe? Well, it means not dating that guy or culling back that friend who thinks less of me than I think of myself. Then, it's been how many years of traumatic childhood? Why would I bring that same suffering into my adulthood?
Yeah, 100%.
That doesn't sound like a role model for other people would do. So that's one of the things. The other thing that I think has been really good in the healing is like doing the self-work, whether that be therapy or courses or somatic stuff or retreats, or I am insatiable in terms of learning how to improve myself. But one big thing that I do that is maybe a bit different than a lot of people is I'm ruthless about actioning what I learn. So you see, you can become a personal development junkie, but then you never action what you learn. So that and reading saved me. So I would put reading on a separate note to the therapy stuff. And the reading, what's interesting is when you're growing and you're going from the place of leaving the previous version of you behind, there's a very lonely middle point where you're in the in-between, you're making new friends that have more similar values and outlook to you, but they're not deep friendships yet. And it's incredibly lonely, and it can be very easy to backslide during that time. And so one of the things that really helped with the backsliding for me was continuously reading books about self-improvement that reminded me and kept me disciplined to staying on this course to becoming the best version of me. And I think that I still do that today, just with not as much frequency as I used to.
Yes, 100%. I agree with all of that. And those are such great techniques for people who are, I know there are people listening who, because I've heard the stories of the inability to be able to cull friends, and people who are like energy vampires, or people who are like bringing other people down because they feel less than. So they don't like when other people feel good about themselves. And I know there are people struggling with this. And so I hope those techniques are really helpful to those listening who are struggling with being able to cut friends out, because that is one of the best ways to kind of just get rid of the negativity. But also, I found that when I started doing that, I allowed energy and space for good to come in, more good and more people who are like-minded. And now when I look at my friend circle, I'm like, wow, like these people, they're like-minded, they're generous, they're kind, they're intellectually curious, they're, and they're exactly what I was looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Cheers to
100%
that. I wish I had
yes.
a question. Cheers to you. I would put that at the top of the list for like 2024. Things to do is get more comfortable with that. You can't believe how even having someone in your circle who's a secret hater.
Yes.
So that's what I call them. They're like, oh my God, you go girl, but they're a secret hater. What even having that energy?
I agree. I agree. Yeah. But then they do show themselves. Like they show themselves. There's moments and you're like, what? Like, did that just happen? Did that person just say that? Like just those moments. Like you're like,
I don't have anyone anymore.
Yeah.
Like that. And it's beautiful.
Can I ask you a question? Do you actually cut them out like that's it, burnt bridge, or do you keep them at a distance?
So I do what's called the 90-day break. So not with telling them, but what I do is I do a break for 90 days because I believe human connections are really important. And so during that 90 days, I just distance and I really start to think about, was I annoyed because I was jet lagged? Or were they actually in the wrong? Or is this something that can be repaired? And all of those things. And interestingly, by the time you get to the end of the 90 days, you'll know if that person should still stay in or whether they should stay out. I think my intuition's a lot better now than it was when I last had to cull someone. So now I would almost be more decisive, but back in that time where I was moving from the old version of me to the new version of me, I wasn't quite so sure and I valued that person. So the 90-day thing worked. And at the end of the 90 days, I was like, there's just been too many transgressions.
Yes.
So
yes,
I have to, like third strike, like I have to cut this. And so I had sent this person the birthday present because it was the birthday present around the time that I found out they'd been saying nasty things about me. And I'd already dropped the birthday present off, but I was still deciding what I was going to do. So I thought, behave as usual until you decide. And then, once the 90-day passes, it was practically the pandemic. And then that put natural space. Yes. And then I grew exponentially. And then I was like, wait a minute, I could have been living like this all that time. Yeah. And then there's no going back.
I love that. Thank you, Simone. That's amazing. Like, such good advice. And I do hope that helps. I hope that helps the person that I'm thinking of who we were just recently talking about that. So thank you. Now, getting back to your family and also parts of the book, I love how you described your father being a human connection superhero in the book. Can you tell us a bit more about him and also seeing how his interactions as shopkeeper every day, the way he interacted, built rapport, and connected with so many different people of all walks of life, how that impacted the way you saw the world and also continues to impact how you see the world?
I grew up in kind of a Kim's Convenience environment. And one thing I have to say that I don't mention in the book was my dad was educated under the British brother and sister school system when they colonized Singapore. So my dad, even though he had this very humble occupation, had such a beautiful way of speaking. And it's actually why my mum fell in love with my dad, was his command of English was beautiful. And I think that one of the things I would add that I don't mention in the book was I think watching my father showed me how much more easy connection could be if you were a strong communicator. So he was able to really express himself in a way that could work across a lot of cultures. So he's quite neutral in that way. My dad was incredible at what I call the three pillars of rapport. He was good at speaking to people like they spoke to him. So if he had an immigrant customer that was also Asian come into the store, he would tweak his accent and he would speak words of dialect. If they were Chinese, he would drop that in, and then he would neutralize if he had a European customer. So he spoke to people like they spoke to him. He spoke to people about the things they like to speak about. So he was a great listener upon first meeting somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And once he would listen, he would then get emotional information to connect with them on, which is really powerful. Listen first. When in doubt, you got social anxiety. It's not about you. Listen first. And the person you're trying to connect with will basically unveil what their needs are to you. And then you can provide them with, fulfill their needs, which is what we all yearn for. It's human condition, right? And then my dad would be great with his body language and mirroring and matching, which is, some basic human connection stuff. Anyone here can Google it. I think that watching his humility was amazing, because I think there was a time in my life when I was in media where I drank my own Kool-Aid, and researching and moving into this line of work and writing the book has just reminded me of the role of humility. We are living in this crazy polarized world. There's wars going on. There is arrogant outbursts on the internet, on social media, from uninformed people about everything that's going on in the world. Where is our humility? Where has our humility gone?
Yes.
And I think if we were all a bit more humble, we are halfway to solving some of these issues, because only when you're humble can you truly listen to another person.
Oh yeah, 100%. I think that's really lovely. When we're actually talking about this idea of the kind of building the rapport, and like what you talk about, the 3 pillars, is this something that even like introverts, people who have that social anxiety, who don't feel maybe they have like the courage to, mirror people and do, different struggles? Because I'm an extrovert, but I do have a lot of friends who are more introverted in their nature. And I think I always found it interesting because I like feed off of human connection. Like I feed off of other people's energy. And so it energizes me to be around other people. But for some people, it's like the opposite. And so I wonder whether or not the 3 pillars that you talk about, which is really helpful, do you think that applies both to introverts and extroverts?
Yeah, so I think what's fascinating is it does. These are universal rules. Rapport is basically where people perceive you to be more like them than you actually are. It goes back to when we're evolving as human beings in tribes. And of course, people in your tribe looked like you, spoke like you, moved their body like you. So we're doing all these rapport building things. We're tenderizing the meat before marination being trust. Okay. And the trust, we can have connections. This is what you do when you first meet someone. But some great tips for introverts to connect. Firstly, let's let go of this TikTok myth that introverts don't need human connection. We all need human connection on a spectrum. It's part of our DNA. It's part of our wiring. It's how we thrived as human beings. We had safety in numbers. It's why we survived as Homo sapiens. Yes. So we all need it. So firstly, get rid of that block that you don't need it. You need it. Secondly, go to an event. I have a lot of introverted friends. They go to events with me. I do the hard yards for them. I draw people to us, and therefore the introvert doesn't get exhausted. They can then make friends with who's around. If you're an introvert and you're going to a network or a mixer, wear something really bright and peacocky that can be the center of conversation, draws people over to you instead of you having to do the approach. And big one for introverts that I've produced an audio for the Hey House Empower You app called The 7 Ways to Fight Loneliness. And in this, I talk about great hack for introverts. It's like Dad did, listen first. If you've been socially anxious, lonely, or just introverted and it drains you, social connection, you don't have to go in and be the life of the party. You don't have to go in and be the keynote speaker on stage. Go in with an others-driven approach that you're going to serve someone else in your communication by listening and helping them, just like my dad did. And that will actually help you to socialize, because introverts are very good listeners. So if they're engaged in what someone is saying, it's more likely it's going to be effortless because you're interested. Anything that we're interested in is more effortless. And therefore you can then ask questions, but don't think that you have to go up with people and open with the conversation. Go to that family do that we have coming up in this festive season.
Yes.
And sit next to the new boyfriend of your little sister. And if he's more extroverted, he'll start talking, and listen first, and then find a point of connection, relatability, and keep talking about that. So that would be my top 3 things for introverts. Wear something attention grabbing. Get out of your head that you don't need connection. That's the lonely brain telling you to self-isolate. And listen first. And also tag along with your extroverted friends. Those things should help.
I love that. That is perfect. I think that seems like almost like a little short or a video, a TikTok video or something.
I should.
That's a good one. That will help a lot of people. Thank you, Simone. Now, getting into the book a bit, you explained that a lack of human connection has been linked to many mental and physical health issues, including hoarding, rage, addiction, depression, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and suicide. You also shared a meta-analytic review from 2015 that discovered that a lack of social connection heightens health risks as much as smoking 15 cigarettes per day or having an alcohol use disorder. Can you, I mean, I found that shocking. That link was so shocking to me. Can you share a little bit more about the research that you discovered on the impact that loneliness can have on our health? And was there any other research that maybe didn't make it into the book that you wanted to share?
Yeah, so let's start with Julian Holt-Lunstad, who I just spoke along on the same stages at Harvard. She endorsed the book. Julianne is the woman that discovered in her research that you'll see it quoted everywhere that loneliness is as dangerous as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. She's the OG. There are so many other bits of research. For example, Dr. Louise Hockley studied micro-awakenings in people's sleep as a marker of loneliness. So people who have disrupted sleep, loneliness is like the disrupted sleep is a symptom of loneliness.
Yes.
And obviously, if you're not sleeping, that's going to lead to a lot of other issues. Your serotonin is going to be low, so you're going to have a diminished mood, which can then snowball into other things. This all goes back, if I can just explain. You're all probably going, I'm reading this stuff everywhere, but why? How can loneliness be doing this? So I want you to imagine that we're all going back thousands of years. We're living on the savannah in tribes, and the connection kept us safe from saber-toothed tigers, predators, getting lost, famine, all of these things. Safety in numbers. That's literally our brain solidified as early humans. That's the connection. And if we were separated from the tribe, we would not last long at all. And even though we live in this super modern world, that cave person brain still sits in there and has that response. So what would have happened during that time in those tribes if we were cast out is our body would go into fight or flight response, a survival mode, because we wouldn't survive. So without my tribespeople, I'm going to die. A saber-toothed tiger is going to get me easily and going to pick me off. And that alarm said, go back, find the tribe, you're lost, or go find people, you'll be more safe in numbers. Now, that's okay on an incidental level. We still get that. When you're an expat and you live in multiple countries, first 90 days, you're going to be without your people. Your body's going to go to a party, go meet people, meet friends. You don't have any resources.
Mm-hmm.
So Dr. James Cohn, who I interviewed, and you can see the interview on YouTube, he talks about the body's bioenergetic resources. When we are with a trusted connection and we are about to do a challenging task, we don't just perceive our own level of energy, our level of energy, awakeness, staying power, all of these things. We don't just count our own bioenergetic resources. We actually, our brain computes the person next to us, that their amount of resources is part of us. Mm-hmm. So we literally do not perceive, when we say all this spiritual stuff about we are one, we are all connected, that is backed up by the science. So our brain literally goes, I am going to be able to climb that steep hill more successfully with another person next to me, because if I have an accident, that person's got bioenergetic resources that's going to save me. Yes. So we feel safer around people because of that. So hence why you're an expat, you're like, I need friends. I'm not safe. Now, on an incidental level, this is not bad. Like, this is just the body's alarm to go out and connect. Mm-hmm. But what happens for people who are chronically lonely is the fight or flight response is daily. Mm-hmm. It's chronic. And therefore, the stress hormones are piling up in that system. And we know how stress breaks the body down and leads to cardiovascular disease, cancer, all these other things that we've been mentioning. So we need to not be in that hypervigilant survival mode. Yes. And what satiates that is human connection. Loneliness is the perception that you're not getting your connection needs met, maybe the type or maybe the amount of connection. And so to fill that gap, you need to be connected.
Yes. Well, and you talked about the 5 different types of human connection, and this feels like a really nice way to explore those five types. Do you want to share those with us?
So this is what I came up by, reading almost every study out there over and over again. This was like a recurring trend that these different types of connections were cited, but nobody put it together like that. I guess because I'm from the Instagram, TikTok generation, I was like, you've got to make it easy for people. But I actually came up with it because I was so disheartened by how many incorrect Instagram posts I was seeing. Like, if you can't have a deep conversation with your friend, cut them off. That's actually not how connection works. We need different types of connections from different people. Mm-hmm. So one of them is self-connection, subject of my next book. which is an awareness of the type of experience you're having at any given moment. And that is it's a knowing of yourself. Without that, you don't connect well with others. And what's really interesting is the lonely brain actually severs self-connection. The lonely brain tells you to stay in and isolate, even though what you need is to be out and meeting people. And so having that self-connection is really vital to fighting loneliness. And then we have intimate connection, which is the 5 closest people to us. Evolutionary anthropologist Robin Dunbar often describes this as the 5 people you cohabitate with. If you're single like me, this could be your besties. They're people that you can go to in a crisis and you can be fully vulnerable with.
Yes.
The next rung of connection is relational. This is belonging to a social fabric where there's a level of mutual care and interdependence. So if you need a light fixed and you can't reach, you can knock on the neighbor's door. They'll come and help you out. Your kids need to be babysat or your car breaks down, and someone in the community will help you out. So it's that feeling of I'm part of a social fabric. And that's really what remote work and modernity has done. Is a big killer of relational connection. You know, we can see that cities used to be planned around a central piazza or a central church or place of worship. They're no longer planned that way anymore. And a lot of that relational connection used to happen, you know, the dialogue around that used to happen around that central piazza, and cities are no longer planned like that anymore. And then after relational connection, we have collective connection. This is people you don't have to be best buddies with, but they're people that you share a certain thread with. So you and I have collective connection, Nicole, in our love of personal development and the Hay House thread. We're part of that tribe. Now, that doesn't mean that I know your deepest, darkest secrets and you know mine, but we have that thread. And this one shouldn't be underestimated because it's the reason why people leave their families to join extremist groups, because they don't feel seen for their interests within their family. And they crave being seen in that way so badly. So they join ISIS. Yes. So it's one that people underestimate how powerful that sense of belonging and affiliation is.
Yeah.
And by the way, relational collective connection and intimate connection is the work of a fantastic Bruce A. Austin at Rochester University of Technology. So that's kind of where I've elaborated on his types. And another one is micro connections. And these we really missed during the pandemic. These are the wave to your neighbor, high five to your barista at Starbucks. These are small, everyday, seemingly banal interactions, but they actually are the gateway to deeper connection. And they actually hold a whole bunch of oxytocin and dopamine that make us feel good when we get that smile from the old lady crossing the street. They're important and we need that, and we're losing that because we don't go into the office as much. There's great work by Susan Pinker on that you can read, a book called The Village Effect. It's really powerful. So those are the 5 types. Now, I'll give myself an example. I'm really strong in 4 of them, but that intimate connection, specifically for a romantic partner, is currently getting quite lonely for me. So I've been single now for almost 2 years. And at the beginning, it's fine. You're like, oh, you'd rather be single than in a relationship. Oh, it's hot, it's fun, I'm out. But now that we're getting close to, the over 18-month mark, that desire for that partner is starting to get there. And I'm speaking about that more openly on my Instagram now. And there's probably going to be a book about that eventually. But at 39, I do have that real cortisol in my veins that this is actually really difficult to find. And will I ever find it? And so I do have that fight or flight response. And I know that I have to do things like do paintings or write a book or do something that creatively lifts me, which helps to make me feel connected to myself, that helps to mitigate the feelings of loneliness around that. And there's a fantastic gentleman called Dr. Jeremy Noble who talks about using art to combat loneliness. So I'm about to start reading his book called Project Unlonely.
Amazing. And would you that's just like a brainstorming off the cuff, but if let's say creativity is like this researcher you mentioned, creativity is such a beautiful way of connecting. But what if you even did like a pottery course or a painting course with people? Then you almost are touching on like the collective connection.
So that's what I did. I did an embroidery.
Oh, did you? Yeah.
And I met some amazing Singaporean women. And I'm hoping to do a course for my email list, for my community, with the Japanese art of kintsugi. Hope I'm saying that right. Where pottery is broken and then it's sealed together with gold. And then it looks even more beautiful than when it was the original pottery. And that's such a good analogy for trauma and how there are so many gifts from my trauma. That's a post that I'm going to do coming up. So many gifts of my trauma that are I would not trade them for the world. And so I'm going to be doing that hopefully in the new year. I've got a call about that soon and blast it out to the email list and have women joining us. in Singapore.
Amazing. Well, if anyone's listening, please do reach out to Simone. I'll obviously put all of her information in the show notes, but definitely follow this space if this is very interesting to you, because it does sound really interesting. And thank you. That's amazing. Another big crux of the book was talking about the link between loneliness and addiction. You referenced work from Dr. Gabor Mate, as well as a book written by Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah, and that whole what happened to you, and which I always think was so nice when it came out. I was like, that explains it. That explains why these people are so mean. What happened to you? But anyway, it explained that children who are neglected or suffer trauma at a young age can feel a real strong sense of disconnection. And because that forms their worldview, that they aren't safe. And then that can also result in them developing chronic distress, and that makes them more vulnerable to addiction and to relieve the sort of chronic distress that they're feeling. I found this really eye-opening for me. I think that if I was to say, if anything that I was addicted to, it's probably food from an emotional comfort eating perspective. I would say I identified with that in the book, because it's addiction of everything, not just like your typical, drugs or alcohol or whatever we think it is. And then you also talked about being a love addict and how that also is a form of addiction. So can you maybe explain this a little bit? And then also, I think you self-identified as a love addict as well, and how you were able to kind of heal that part of yourself.
So I'll start with the love addict thing. I mean, I'm still definitely healing it. It's actually my biggest piece of the pie to focus on, because it shows up a lot less now in my platonic friendships. I still have some of the thoughts around, if my friend can't make it, maybe it's abandonment or this or that. But I'm able to mediate that stimulus and then the response. But I struggle in dating hugely with this still. And I think it is increasingly getting worse because of my desire to want to be in a committed relationship. So therefore it's heightened. And therefore also because I know all the stuff that I know, a date is no longer a date. It's like a crucible of so much meaning to me. It's almost like I feel I know too much. Ignorance is bliss. I'd be much more fun to date if I didn't know what I know. So I was diagnosed by the therapist as a love addict, but I don't disagree with her. And it's basically a bit of like, if you know about attachment styles, anxious attachment styles. So for me, for example, it is very difficult to be in the moment with someone. It's always wanting more love, more validation, more affirmation. This goes for my relatives, this goes for my platonic friendships, but I see it the most worst right now with dating. And that is because I date so little, right? Whereas I'm interacting with family and friends repeatedly. And I think that's such a great signifier for everyone about like the power of desensitization, the power of if you're lonely, get out and put yourself out there and you will get better. Yes, the first few interactions will be awkward. Yes, the first few interactions might drain you, but you will get better. And so I'm trying to have that same approach, because I see how great I am with my platonic friendships is because I'm so social. Whereas my natural wiring is still to think that my platonic friendships are abandoning me, that when one of my friends can't make it, it's because they, there's something wrong with me. These are the limiting core beliefs. However, by simple process of engaging with people who I know are safe for me and wonderful friends, how much it's really like a 1 in 100 interaction now that I might have these little thoughts.
Yes.
But with dating, because I'm out of practice, it's a lot more augmented. And so advice to anyone who's experiencing some of these issues, I mean, just get in the game, play the sport, and watch yourself get better with practice. So people become anxiously attached, or in this other case, love addicts, when you have that primary caregiver who is a roller coaster, right? And you never feel that the love that you should get is satiated. And then you spend your whole life trying to get that love, but actually, because you've never really felt it fully, nothing is ever enough. And you will do things that they call in anxious attachment style, they call it protest behavior, but you will do testing. You'll test people to get that assurance of that love and validation. Yeah. And so I'm still working on all of this all the time.
Sorry, the reason I reacted like with testing is because I test my husband all the time. I test him all the time. And then he's always like, oh, is this another test? And I'm like, yeah, it is. I'm always testing to see, like, do you love me enough? Like, do you love me enough? So that's very awakening moment in my own, but I guess we all do, right? I mean, at the end of the day.
I thought we all do until you date someone who's very secure and they don't.
Yeah.
So a secure attachment style does not.
Right.
And then you go, wow.
Interesting. Yeah.
So a secure attachment style perceives
Yeah.
does not perceive that anyone is doing anything dodgy. They don't have that skepticism that Bruce T. Perry and Oprah, describe, where the first interaction of the human connection is that the primary caregiver let you down. And therefore you go into the world feeling that people are not wholly to be trusted. And that's kind of how that insecure attachment style begins. Oh my gosh, well, we could just talk about this all night long, Lionel Richie. And
all night long, I know.
But I think a man would just think you're crazy. But it's terrible because when
Yes.
I go on a date now, it's like when I first learnt about radio, like what makes a good radio presenter and a good talk break, that bit where they talk between the songs. And then I could never listen to the radio again without picking apart how that DJ formulated their talk break. And that's now me with dating. Like I can't go on the date without going, avoidance sign 1, 2, 3, 4, GTFO, Simone. GTFO. Yeah, and that is, it's terrible, but that's what it's now become. So I should stop reading. Maybe I should stop reading.
I think that you need to put together like a cheat sheet. No, in fact, and I feel like a lot of women who are listening would say, can I have a cheat sheet about what I need to look for? Like narcissism, attachment style, like all of these like red flags. I think
read the book Attached. And inside the book Attached, they give a cheat sheet. And I made people I used to date, and I remain friends with the men that I used to date, because I know the stuff about wounding. So even if they did something not very nice, like I know where the wound comes from. It's awful. But I got them to do it post dating, and that was quite wonderful, because I was like, oh, wow. So now I know what was going on, and we have correlative proof because these guys are still my friends and lovely enough did the cheat sheet. And I was like, wow. There's always a wow moment for me where spirituality, science, and reality come together.
Well, you've given them a beautiful gift.
Yeah, confirm all the same things. And I'm like, well, can't be alive. Every angle points back to this conclusion.
I mean, you are a very good human, Simone, because a lot of people would have been like, goodbye, good riddance, and I'm sorry for you. But you're very kind to be helping them with their growth. Like, what an angel you are.
One of the guys read the book and was like, you're a really beautiful person. And I was like, you know what? Because I dated you, I know what's going on there. I will take that compliment.
Yeah.
From a narcissist, I'll take that compliment. Thank you so much. Bless your heart. Yeah.
Love it.
I love it. It's hilarious. My life is hilarious.
Right. I know. It's so fun. Everyone needs to follow Simone, because this is just like, and she is exactly this warm, kind, this is what you see. It's such a beautiful thing when you follow her. You get all these fun updates, and she's living her best life, and in a very fun and very vulnerable way. And you'll love her. Anyway, we have one more question from an EnvisionAir, and she really wanted to understand, I guess she shared her own experience. Her name is Ruth, and she shared feelings of shame and guilt when she had, I guess it was like postpartum. So she had a child, a beautiful, like healthy child. And because I think she was living far away from her family and she was getting that disconnect, she felt a lot of maybe, I don't know if it was postpartum in addition to the loneliness. And she just wanted to understand like a bit about the shame that comes along with feelings of disconnect, because that was the emotion that she shared. And she said, I'd love to know a little bit more from Simone's perspective about how shame as a feeling comes in when you feel disconnected or lonely.
So I want to start with saying that shame is like one of the lowest vibrations. So it's a fantastic book called The Art of Letting Go that describes all the different levels of the vibrational spectrum and how shame really pulls us lower, because it's not just whatever happens to make us feel shameful, it's all the residual feelings afterwards of that shame. So it's like double whammy. People feel ashamed to say they're lonely in general. And I feel that the shame around that comes also from the guilt of not knowing about the 5 types of human connection. So people like, I have a beautiful house and a beautiful husband and a healthy baby, and how dare I feel lonely when my friend's going through 20 rounds of IVF trying to have a kid, and who am I to feel lonely and bad about my life? There is these irrational thoughts that we have, but loneliness is irrational. That's what we know. It rewires the brain. There's a bit about this in the book. You have nothing to be ashamed of. Loneliness is literally a biological response to the threat of being away from your tribe. Let's think about that. Loneliness is the biological response in that cave person brain in your head that, hey, I don't feel totally socially connected because of whatever reason, and therefore I'm lonely. So let's stop thinking about it as loneliness so much as just a certain type of trigger of that fight or flight response is a better way to reframe it, actually, because it's happening physiologically to us. It's not just a mental thing that happens alone. It's triggering hormones and all of those things. And nothing augments shame like silence. So if you are not telling your husband or telling your best friend, look, I feel lonely right now, that shame is going to build in you. And just a note of who the people are to disclose this to are your 5 intimate connections. And if you don't have those intimate connections, only disclose this to the people who deserve your vulnerability, who there's a level of trust there, not necessarily for the internet.
Yes. So maybe more relational connection rather than collective, if that's...
So relational to intimate is good, but if you don't have intimates, somebody that there's a level of trust is really important.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Simone. Right. Well, we could speak about this for another hour, but we are getting towards the end, and I just wanted to obviously thank you for this. And I wanted to start the EnvisionAir questionnaire, which is the final segment of the podcast. And so this is time when we ask our guests to reflect on their past, present, and future. So with regards to your past, Simone, if you could give any advice to your 15-year-old self, what would it be and why?
I would be like, you are not meant to be like everyone else. You were never meant to be like everyone else. And I know it gets lonely, but you'll be really glad later that you don't do life like everyone else, because everyone else's sort of life will never make you happy. And the more you pursue it, the more lonely and lacking belonging it will make you feel by trying to go with the majority.
Yes. Great advice. And reflecting on your present, if you could get any advice from anyone in the world, who would it be and why?
It would be probably Oprah Winfrey. She never had kids and she never got married. And I want to know the real back end. Like, Oprah, tell me the real back end. When was the tipping point where you were like, it's not going to happen for me, and that's okay? And I have a lot of anxiety around this now, so I would love her to chime in and be like, it's all good.
Oh, yes. She's amazing. Do you know who another one is? I actually heard it was Tracy Ellis was speaking with Oprah about this topic, the same topic. And have you heard that interview? If not, I'll send it to you.
A slice of it where she says, until someone like that's right comes along, I am gladly single. Gladly single. And I mean, Tracy's 10 years older than me. Oprah, I think, is 20 years older than me. I definitely think that you get to that point. I'm getting close to that point, but I'm not quite there yet. KIV, as we say in Asia, keep in view. We'll have an update, I'm sure, on my Instagram.
I can't wait.
I can't wait. Like, today happened, and it's that future is not for me, or maybe it is for me. Yeah.
Well, I'm excited. And I actually have a feeling like 2024, now that you're going to be more like less, you're doing you do so much traveling, international speaking, maybe 2024, a little more grounded, we'll see.
Totally.
Speaking it into existence, right?
My body just can't, I just don't think my body does it very well anymore.
I mean, mine already 35, I think it was like, what's happening? But anyway, but it's fine. Right. And reflecting into your future, what's one goal that you'd like to achieve in the next 5 years?
I would love to be able to buy property in Singapore and not be decorating something that I rent. When I was 30, with the money I earned in Dubai, I bought a flat in Australia. But I've decided that now I'm a permanent resident of Singapore. Very likely I'll stay here really, really long term. I would love to be able to decorate something that I own.
Is it hard to get onto the property ladder in Singapore?
Oh, yeah. It's one of the most expensive places in the world. Also to own a car as well. But I'm not interested in driving. So I don't care about the car. But it's very, I think starting price for property in Singapore is $1 million. So it's a lot.
Wow. All right. Again, speaking into existence, it'll happen. And we can't wait to see it. All like the updates on Instagram. So yeah, very cool. Very cool. Right. Well, thank you so much, Simone, for being on the EnvisionAir podcast. You were, just dream guest. You have so much knowledge to impart on loneliness and the need for connection, human connection. So, thank you again for being on here and sharing so generously with us. For those who want to buy the book, which I highly recommend, go, I'll put them in the show notes, the link. It's available on Amazon, and that's where I bought it. And also do leave a review if you buy it on Amazon. And then I think she also has a direct link to her website as well. And I will also, I'm going to be giving away a copy of your book, Simone. And so yes, I'm super excited. So one listener who is listening, there's going to be details. It's a giveaway, and I'm going to put the details in the show note and on my social. And so this is very exciting. So anywhere in the world, wherever you are, there's an opportunity for you to get a free copy of it. And then if you want to connect with Simone, connect with her visiting her website, www.SimoneHeng. So it's Simone, Simone, and then Heng, HENG.com. And then obviously please follow her on social at Simone Heng. Again, everything will be in the show notes. And we just want to thank you so much again, Simone, for being on here. You have been such a star. So yeah, sending you lots of love.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.